What up, Rafflators? Welcome back to Raffle Nation. Today I'm going to address the issue of crime. One of Guyana's famous or notorious criminals, the most notorious criminals, a guy named Roger Khan, is about to be released from federal prison in New York, and he will be deported back to Guyana in July. So I think this is an appropriate time for me to address the issue of crime in Guyana. Stay tuned.
Oh, this is my day. I'm ready to take it on, come what may.
So Roger Khan was one of the criminal associates of the previous government. He was operating in Guyana in what is called the Phantom Squad. His mode of operation was extrajudicial killing. He was an agent of the government. This is all well established and acknowledged, right? So he was an agent of the government to combat crime. So instead of using the police force and the constitution, that is the laws of Guyana, to go after crime, the previous administration decided to use criminals to go after crime, and Roger Khan was the main criminal they used. And so he was commissioned to kill criminals. And he committed dozens of extrajudicial killings between the period 2005 to 2010. He was in fact a drug dealer, drug trafficker, and so he made most of his money from trafficking drugs. Eventually he was captured by the DEA in Suriname, and he was extracted and extradited to New York, where he was tried and convicted of trafficking cocaine into New York. He was sentenced to prison, to federal prison in New York, and now he is about to be released from prison in July, after which he will be deported back to Guyana. And so this is the time for me to address some of the questions that are arising about crime, because what has happened over the years is that criminals have been deported from New York, or from the US in general, and inserted back into the Guyanese society. These are criminals, some of them who've never lived in Guyana, and so the population of criminals and the amount of crime is increasing and has been escalating as a result of this. And so I want to do a video on crime in Guyana and how to avoid crime. But let me first address this important issue, which is one of the sources of crime in Guyana, and that is the deportation of criminals. More recently, for example, another criminal known as Big Head was extracted from Jamaica, extradited to New York, and he's about to stand trial and probably will be sentenced to federal prison and eventually will be deported back to Guyana. But this is what has been happening, a cycle of crime. In the case of Roger Khan, this criminal and convict coming back into Guyana has to be held accountable for all the other crimes and murders that have been committed in Guyana during the time when he was operating with the previous government. And so the more important question we would like to know and want answered is, what will be done to Roger Khan and other criminals when they come back to Guyana? Will he be held accountable, tried and convicted for all the murders that were committed? And will the transcripts of the trial he went through in New York be made available so that we can see who the criminal associates were, who were his contacts and his associates in crime in Guyana, so that they also may be brought to justice? Right, so these are the issues, but I'm going to continue with this in a follow-up video shortly on how to avoid crime, how to avoid becoming a victim of crime in Guyana. And so that is what will be the sequel to this. Now, in order for me to address the issue of how to avoid crime in Guyana and how to avoid becoming a victim, I'm going to have to give you a backstory, a background to what crime has been in Guyana. So back in the 1970s and the 1960s, 1970s, early 1980s, Guyana was known as a choke and rob country, right? So Guyana was known as a country where the main form of blue-collar crime was choke and rob. So they would catch you, this is usually African-American young men, catch you in the street, choke you, put your head in a vice and steal your jewelry and perhaps money or your wallet or stuff like that. So we were known as a choke and rob country, and that was the major form of blue-collar crime committed by mostly African-Americans, Afro-Guyanese. But there was also white-collar crime committed mostly by Indo-Guyanese, which tended to take the form of accounting fraud and check fraud and insurance fraud, where businesses would burn their inventory or burn their warehouses or burn their buildings down and apply for insurance. So this used to be the major two forms of crime in Guyana, right? So these suspicious fires that were started by businesses to claim insurance and the choke and robs. However, what happened after the 1980s, Guyana became a transshipment point for cocaine. So during the 1990s and early 2000s, Guyana became this transshipment point for cocaine coming from Colombia and deep down in South America. And as a result of that, a lot of capital, a lot of money started accumulating in the hands of drug dealers in Guyana. And so a lot of these new buildings and big buildings started going up around the country where the origin of the money, the origin of the funds to build these buildings were unknown, and it was not being acknowledged. And it was suspected that the administration, the government, was involved in shielding and protecting some of these criminals. Now we know that Roger Khan was one of those individuals, and that is one of the reasons why we need to prosecute him, so that we need to understand the extent to which the government was involved in drug dealing and drug trafficking in Guyana. We know this for a fact because a lot of it has come out in the trial in New York. And that is one of the reasons why the crime situation in Guyana is the way it is, and one of the reasons why the real estate situation is the way it is, because the value of real estate skyrocketed because there was all of this money in the economy now from drug dealing that was available to purchase property in real estate that ordinary Guyanese who worked an average job could not afford. Right, so there was this amount of money available to purchase property that drove up the price of real estate beyond the means of most Guyanese, and that was the direct impact of drug trafficking and drug money flowing through the country. And this is the relevance of Roger Khan to the Guyanese society. So to be able to correct that, to fix some of these problems, to understand some of these problems, we need to understand the role of the government and the role of Roger Khan and the drug trafficking industry in Guyana, in the Guyanese economy. And we also need to understand who were the players, who were the criminals who committed the dozens and dozens and dozens of murders, extrajudicial killings during the period from 2007 to 2013, 2014. So tell me what you think about this situation with criminals returning to Guyana and the impact on crime in Guyana, and how it affected the economy and real estate in Guyana. All right, we're going to address this in future videos, but for now, this is my backstory to what I'm about to deal with as in my next video, and stay tuned for that. 12 most common crimes in Guyana and how to avoid becoming a victim. If you want to see more content like this, click like and subscribe. Remember, you can support this channel on Patreon and on PayPal. And you can share this video with friends and family around the world so that they can see what's happening in Guyana. And later!